Galatians 3:28. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus.
Galatians 5:14. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself.
Matthew 5:44. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Which religion do you think is the most discriminated against?
Well, worldwide it's said that Catholics are being discriminated against.
I think Catholicism.
I would probably say Islam, because there's a lot of stereotyping.
To the truth, and they want to teach the truth. And when you see what is happening in the world today about medicine or medical ethics, you see they hold fast to what traditionally is correct, but some other religions or denominations, they fight against them. Yeah, when you talk of abortion or all those things, gene technology and all that, okay?
As it turns out, Catholicism is the most discriminated against religion, facing
really?
persecution in 168 different countries. What do you think it is?
I mean, I think it's terrible that as people of this earth, we should be sharing it and living together and not persecuting each other.
I think it's terrible. There's like 1 billion Catholics worldwide, and there's a lot of people discriminated against it. So we have to change it.
Good point. What do you think we can do to stop this discrimination now?
Well, we got to intensify our prayers and support and take after our Lord Jesus Christ, who never wanted to fight. You remember the event at the Garden of Gethsemane when Peter drew the sword, he said, no, don't. Okay? So we follow his example to bring peace.
Just have to bring it back to simpler times when we all lived in harmony. We gotta just get past all the stereotypical stuff that everyone talks about these days. Just have to unite as one people and live together happily.
Thank you.
No problem.
As teenagers, we often question how complex mathematical principles will apply to our lives. And this mystery still surrounds us today.
Even early philosophers involved themselves in arithmetic to balance their lives between the physical and metaphysical. Yet, even basic mathematical properties can be applied to our lives. One of the most prominent examples of applicable theory is the transitive property of equality.
This theory states that if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. Sounds simple enough, right? It's a rather simple concept in math, but a rather complex concept to apply in our lives. The fundamental equality of all people.
We spend so much time adding up our differences between each other that we have little to no time to consider the similarities between communities, between races, and most of all, between faiths. As a global community, we face a plethora of challenges regarding discrimination, and the only way we can overcome the challenges that threaten to tear us apart is by coming together, all differences aside.
Unfortunately, religious discrimination runs rampant throughout our lives, giving Catholics an ethical dilemma: stand up to it or stay silent. The Catechism of the Catholic Church posits, the equality of men rests essentially on their dignity as persons and the rights that flow from it, and every form of social or cultural discrimination on the grounds of religion must be curbed and eradicated as incompatible with God's design.
Thus, it is ethically mandatory that we must put a stop to religious discrimination. But in order to do so, we must understand the way discrimination is existing in the church today. So first, let's open our math books and simplify, as we learn together about the origins of Catholic discrimination, as well as where it's most prominent today. Then, let's stay after school for some studying so we can learn ways to apply ethics towards the mission of stopping discrimination. And finally, let's go to the back of the book and peek at some solutions, so we can learn how we can ethically combat discrimination and use what we learn to further our mission.
Historically, social disagreements between ideologies lead to conflict between people from each such ideology. Catholic strengths and resistance to social sin led to their condemnation way back in the 1970s. One of the most infamous examples of this is the case of Roe v. Wade, the infamous court case that led to the legalization of abortion.
The social sin of legal abortion has hindered the progress of the Catholic mission. As of right now, the Catholic stance on abortion remains rather unpopular, as the Church teaches that any artificial interruption of life between the points of conception and natural death is sin. Moreover, the Catholic stance on marriage equality remains extremely controversial and even taboo in some areas. As a result of these social differences in belief, propaganda against Catholicism has increased.
Perhaps the most malicious accusation against Christians is that we are against freedom and equality because of such aforementioned beliefs. These overgeneralizations lead to even wilder accusations that are based on rather loose evidence.
These accusations are only facilitated by a resurgence of secularism in today's world. A recent study from Washington University in 2012 shows that despite Catholicism being the largest religion quantitatively in the US, representing 85% of the population, there exists a secular resurgence in America based on social principles. Moreover, the study finds that a rise in secularism is also accompanied by a rise in religious discrimination. And thus, these are the factors that have led to Catholic discrimination in modern times. A resurgence in secularism, socio-political controversy, and even historical precedent. Thus, it is our ethical obligation to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself. We must be the catalysts of a turning point in religious history. Through Catholic ethics, we can find methods to stop religious discrimination. But where can we see concrete examples of discrimination today in Catholicism? It's actually more prominent than we may think. We can examine examples of Catholic discrimination in three areas: school, the workplace, and overall society.
There exists a long history of anti-religion in schools, especially with Catholicism. For example, a 1980 court case known as Stone v. Graham found that the posting of the Ten Commandments in schools is unconstitutional. Additionally, the case Abington School District v. Shemp led the court to find that Bible reading over school intercoms to be unconstitutional. And perhaps most infamously, the case of Engel v. Vitale, which ruled that it is unconstitutional for public schools to sponsor and promote non-denominational prayer.
However, these court cases are old, about 30 to 50 years old to be precise. Nonetheless, Catholic discrimination in school continues today. For example, the Los Angeles Community College restricted a Christian student for sharing his beliefs in a speech in class. He was called fascist by his professor and soon went to court over the issue. Even worse, Superior Street Elementary School forbade a student with cerebral palsy to dance in the school talent show because the song she chose was We Shine by Steve Fee, and it was too religious. However, some of these cases do end happily. For instance, Chase Windbank of Colorado Springs High School was taken to court because he led a Bible study with other students in his free time. Fortunately, he won the case and received the freedom of religion.
Ethical Catholic teaching condemns the discrimination of religions and different faiths. We are ethically obliged to act against such instances of discrimination. Regarding Thomas Aquinas' theory of virtue ethics, legalistic ethics and virtue ethics are interdefined. Both Aquinas and modern-day philosophers conclude that no human act is morally right unless it is in line with the love of self and neighbor. Thus, discrimination is intrinsically unethical.
Nonetheless, we can still deduce from this that working to stop discrimination is an ethical obligation. In fact, Aristotle says this himself, that virtue requires discrediting discrimination and vowing for human conciliation. The logic behind such a claim is this. Aristotle claims that humans are separated from the rest of creation due to their ability to reason. Thus, regardless of religion or even gender or race, each person is equally set apart from the rest of creation based upon his or her capacity for reason. Therefore, we all can work to attain what Aristotle claims is his ultimate goal, eudaimonia, or happiness and blessedness. We're not saying that all schools should turn into all Catholic gospel-preaching institutions. We're saying that people shouldn't have to suffer when they share their beliefs in a classroom setting, especially because classrooms are discussion-based settings. All students, whether they be Christian, Jewish, Islam, atheist, Hindu, Sikh, or anything else should be able to share their beliefs freely. Religious equality in school is not about restricting all religious discussion. It should be about allowing open discussion between all religions and not fearing supposed indoctrination.
In the sphere of politics, there exists a perpetual debate over a plethora of policies that everything seems generally chaotic. However, there does lie a hidden structure among the discord. Unfortunately, written throughout this chaos is discrimination, especially discrimination against Catholics.
Historically, the founders of the colonies, especially those in New England, were primarily Protestant and Anglican. People of the Anglican Church, known as Puritans, vowed to rid the Anglican religion of any Catholic characteristics. However, anti-Catholic sentiment even continued in the 19th century, with bigoted nativist groups such as the Know Nothing Party, who blatantly discriminated against Catholic German and Irish immigrants because they were seen as an economic and political threat. Moreover, JFK nearly lost to Nixon in 1960 for the same reason, being openly Catholic. In fact, people fear that a Catholic president will take orders from the Pope and eventually lead to a religious dictatorship.
In fact, the periodical, the National Catholic Review, calls anti-Catholicism the last acceptable form of prejudice. But what exactly does this mean? It seems to be an oxymoron. Acceptable and prejudice do not go together at all. Yet the political spectrum remains rampant with religious discrimination. However, the Church has realized this. Though politics and religion remain perpetually controversial, we are not called to completely avoid politics. In fact, the Church teaches that responsible citizenship is a virtue. To participate in the political process is a moral obligation. We have a right and a duty to participate in our democratic country. We even have the ability to influence governmental decisions. God expects us to act as His people, spread the good news, be the light of the world, and bring the values of the gospel to the public.
Indeed, the bishops of the United States wrote in a pastoral letter, "Believers are called to be a community of conscience within the larger society and to test public life by the values of Scripture and the principles of Catholic social teaching. Our responsibility is to measure all candidates, policies, parties, and platforms by who they protect or undermine the life, the dignity, and rights of the human person, whether they protect the poor and vulnerable and advance the common good. Thus, we are encouraged to act as both Catholics as well as Americans, to ask of our leaders and candidates questions that concern our moral well-being. Through such action, we can make ethical progress as a society by not only diminishing the religious discrimination in politics now, but also preventing it from happening again in the future." In fact, some preventative actions are already happening. A man named Dr. Carl Menninger wrote a book called Whatever Happened to Sin, which argues that people don't like to discuss sin because they fear admitting that they have sinned in the past. Such neglect of our capability to sin and discrimination is ethnically unhealthy.
The political spectrum is ethically unhealthy and rampant with sin and discrimination. However, this is okay. Admitting sin is realistic, but we do not have to despair. Rather, we have to use this knowledge to further our ethical goals in sociopolitics. Thankfully, hope is never lost, and we can finally act to end discrimination in society and politics once and for all.
Hi, nice to meet you. Hi, thank you for this job opportunity. Well, thank you for coming to this job interview. Alright, so why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your qualifications? Oh, well, okay. So I started my undergraduate studies at UCLA, double majoring in both business and economics, where I graduated as valedictorian of my class. Then I went out to Harvard University to study more economics and graduating salutatorian of my class. Nonetheless, I started to move on and started exploring the job market, hoping to land a job right here. Okay, and sounds great. One more question. What religion are you? Is that pertinent to this interview? Absolutely. We're trying to collect as much data as possible. Okay, well, I guess I'm a Roman Catholic. Okay, thank you. I think that'll be all for today. Well, I hope you got all that you need. Thank you for this opportunity again. Absolutely. Oh, cool. Hello? Hi, yes. Calling about that interview you had a week ago? Ah, yes. How was it? Oh, well, I'm sorry to inform you that we weren't able to find a slot for you in our department. We don't believe that you had the necessary qualifications, but we'd like to thank you for seeing interest in our company. Oh, I see. I see. Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. Goodbye.
As crazy as it sounds, situations like this actually happen nearly every day. Clothing such as yarmulkes, hijabs, and even crucifixes can be seen as turnoffs for employers. Nevertheless, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission requires employers to accommodate employees' religious beliefs and practices in aspects of the workplace such as schedule changes, required leave for religious observances, and even dress policies. However, laws are only as good as they are enforced.
In fact, the Pew Research Center reveals in a 4-year study that Christians are the most discriminated against religion, experiencing harassment by the government and employers in 168 different countries. Although religious discrimination and hostilities in the U.S. hasn't increased to the extent that other nations have, American employers still have a tendency to give in to the prejudice.
For example, a man named Jamie Haxby dreamed of becoming a graphic designer all his life. Unfortunately, one of his first encounters with the job market involved religious discrimination. He was denied a job in designing promotional ads for Preston Hall Hotel because he was a Christian and the managers of the hotel were quite openly atheists.
Additionally, another man named Mark Clay from Georgia was suspended for a day from his office job without pay because he showed up on Ash Wednesday with ashes on his forehead.
These are only a few examples of religious discrimination in the workplace today. However, even openly Catholic institutions can be the receivers of religious discrimination as well.
Chick-fil-A, despite their amazing chicken, has been under a lot of scrutiny for its religious policies. For example, it is one of the few restaurant chains to openly observe the Sabbath day as Sunday. According to Chick-fil-A themselves, they remain closed on Sunday to allow their employees and operators to have an opportunity to rest, spend time with their family and friends, and worship. Indeed, Chick-fil-A is forfeiting 1/7 of their weekly profits in order to obey the third commandment.
Yet, Chick-fil-A receives criticism not only because of its Sunday policy, but also because of its open religiosity. They even state that their corporate purpose is to, quote, glorify God by being a faithful steward to all that is entrusted to them, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. Thus, it is with such open religiousness that some accusations on Chick-fil-A that are identical to that of Catholics in general.
CEO Hal Rice says, "You don't have to be a Christian to work at Chick-fil-A, but we ask you to base your business on biblical principles because they work." Yet, regardless on which side people are on, pro or anti-chicken, any controversy surrounding religious discrimination in the workplace is distracted from the true goal, to promote equality and to eradicate discrimination.
Regardless of religion, there exists universal consensus that discrimination is bad. Once discrimination stops, then the world can make true progress because we can finally act as a unit. The USCCB made a statement on Catholic ethical teaching on discrimination which proclaims, "Discrimination must be deplored. Such an attitude contradicts the Christian belief in the equality and inherent dignity of all people, and they must be opposed." Moreover, Pope John the 23rd states that it is not true that some human beings are by nature superior and inferior. All men are equal in their natural dignity.
Therefore, according to ethical logic and Catholic magisterium, discrimination must be stopped in order to make progress, and controversies such as that surrounding Chick-fil-A and other workplace areas are only hindering the intended progress. We are all different, yet we are all the same. Two people with different characteristics may be called to different destinies or goals, but they share the same image and likeness of God, as well as the same fundamental nature and origin. Thus, religious discrimination in the workplace is only harming the world further, and we should all work towards a more tolerant and accepting universe.
There are three aspects of Catholicism and its ethics that can facilitate in avoiding further Catholic discrimination, as well as discrimination against other religions. The first is using the Golden Rule. The second is promoting human solidarity. And finally, the third is using apologetics.
So first, regarding the Golden Rule, Catholicism exists in tandem with other religions on this subject. Loving our neighbor and doing unto others what we would like to have done to us are two axioms that are inherently against discrimination. Through discrimination, we treat innately free and equal citizens as if they were inferior to ourselves. However, when we apply the golden rule to our lives, we are challenged to live like Jesus, and in such a life, there is no room for discrimination.
As St. Francis of Assisi so eloquently says, remember that when you leave this earth, you can take with you nothing that you have received, only what you have given. Therefore, if we give to others our best behavior, our full hearts, and our acceptance of who they are, then we will also receive that same acceptance when we die. Overall, once we start following the golden rule as we are called to do, discrimination can come to a halt because we will intrinsically and exclusively uphold accepting values.
Moreover, we can promote human solidarity in order to combat discrimination. When looking at the Pope's teachings on ethics, Pope Francis appeals to the public authorities and those who are working for social justice when he says, "Never tire of working for a more just world marked by greater solidarity." Furthermore, Pope Francis says solidarity is the non-discriminatory and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good of each individual.
John Courtney Murray, an American Jesuit scholar noted for his contributions to Catholic teaching on religious freedom. He was known for saying that religious discrimination is, quote, disruptive, imprudent, and impractical. Murray argues that ending religious discrimination necessitates beginning religious equality, religious tolerance, and religious acceptance. He proposes that we must start an education system reform by opening the minds of children to religious influence not only of Christianity, but other religions as well, so that all people may grow up practicing their own religion while being exposed to others. Additionally, the Jesuit Social Research Institute made their own statement on religious discrimination. They say, pushing back against discrimination, especially religious discrimination, is grounded in fundamental scriptural beliefs: equal dignity of all people, created in God's image, and Christ's redemption of all.
Moreover, Loyola University of New Orleans states that any theory or form of discrimination whatsoever is morally unacceptable. Discrimination is not merely one sin among many. It is a radical, evil, dividing force, dividing the human family. A special emphasis lies within those last two words, human family. That term lives in tandem with human solidarity and is the key to preventing any further discrimination. If we think of the human race as our own family, we begin to love everyone like family. As a result, this mentality would lessen discrimination throughout the world.
Next, we should emphasize apologetics if we are to further our mission to end discrimination. Theologically, apologetics is defined as the reasoned arguments or writings in defense of our faith and doctrine. It is through apologetics that we may open the minds of skeptics and diminish the amount of people who religiously discriminate because they hold our faith in contempt.
Fluency in apologetics allows us to be able to defend our faith without shoving it down people's throats or being blamed for indoctrination. Perhaps one of the most prominent arguments in favor of anti-Catholicism is that because our religion is so widespread, members are beginning to display their faith inappropriately in settings such as school or work that should supposedly be free of religious influence. Additionally, we must not renounce our faith either in order to fit in with society or promote personal gain such as getting a promotion or earning a scholarship. Renouncing our faith in fear of discrimination is, quite frankly, a cowardly and ineffective way to combat discrimination. Thus, it is never the solution.
Rather, it is through apologetics that we can strike a balance between the two extremes. More specifically, we can spread our faith without being blamed for rubbing it in people's faces, and we can hold a fair conversation with a skeptic or non-believer without having to renounce our faith. Essentially, apologetics allows us to be faithful individuals who can look at religious controversy through multiple perspectives, allowing us to end discrimination from its roots by analyzing and rebutting the primary arguments in favor of religious prejudice.
Although we have focused much on discrimination against Catholicism, it would be an ethical fallacy to neglect other religions as well. We live in a nation where we are lucky enough to experience different customs. We live in the melting pot of America. Luckily, the same aforementioned ethical methods of diminishing discrimination can be used in other religions as well as Catholicism. However, we must first understand and learn about religious discrimination outside Catholicism.
Perhaps one of the most prominent examples of religious discrimination is that against Muslims and Jewish people. Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are nothing new, however. In fact, anti-Semitism has always been a continuation throughout history. Before World War II, before the years of the early church, even before the times of Jesus.
For example, U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum deems anti-Semitism as the longest hatred since it has persisted for over 2,000 years. But in order to keep things concise, here is a brief series of events that marks major moments in the history of anti-Semitism. In the year 439, Jewish people were prevented from holding positions in government.
In 1095, during the years of the Crusades, the Jewish people were caught in the fight between the Muslims and the Christians of Europe, leading many in the Jewish communities to become victims of looting and massacre.
During the 14th century, the Jewish community was a convenient scapegoat to blame for the bubonic plague.
And finally, perhaps most infamous of all, the attempted genocide of Jewish people during the Holocaust in the 1940s, wherein about 6 million Jewish people died. Today, anti-Semitism remains rampant. Israel's Tel Aviv University conducted a study to find that the number of anti-Semitic related incidents around the world surged nearly 40% in 2015. Additionally, the number of incidents linked to anti-Semitism increased in 7 countries.
Just like we do, Orthodox Jewish scholar Alexander Altman states that both Jewish and Christian theologies are linked in their beliefs in Imago Dei, the belief that humans are made in the image and likeness of God. In fact, he says, quote, Jewish and Christian exegetes alike will agree that in the context of Genesis chapter 1, the homo imago Dei motif is to be understood as an emphatic affirmation of man's dignity and preeminence over the rest of creation. Although Altman posits that Judaism and Christianity are fundamentally separate and that their interpretations of such a concept have developed in different ways, he does concede that this is one of the areas of theology that we have in common. Thus, it is ethically mandatory that we protect the human dignity of everyone with the ability to reason.
Nonetheless, discrimination remains prevalent in other religions as well, specifically Islamophobia. With the rise of terrorism in the past few years with instances such as 9/11 and the wars in the Middle East, people have seemed to have painted Muslims in a negative light, pigeonholing them into a violent and radical stereotype. However, these mentalities are only harming efforts to limit and prevent discrimination. Thus, it has become harder in today's world to wear a hijab in public because of the negative connotation that shouldn't, but does come with having one. And this has already happened. A woman named Samantha Elaf was prevented from being hired at an Abercrombie kids store because of her hijab. Moreover, certain politicians have been made both implicit and explicit remarks that discriminate against Islam, blaming members of their religion for destruction and havoc that interrupt and prevent world peace. So, now we've learned how religious discrimination has originated in history, through court cases, governmental decisions, and social controversy. Especially in Catholicism, we've looked at how religious discrimination runs rampant today in our schools, in our workplaces, and especially in politics. Moreover, we've looked at how we can apply ethics to combat discrimination, specifically referring to the Golden Rule, human solidarity, and apologetics. Finally, we examined how enlightening ourselves with the knowledge of discrimination against other religions can lead to a fuller understanding of how to stop such evils.
We can do this in our own lives as well. By exposing our minds to other religions, as mentioned earlier, we can increase acceptance around the world. Moreover, we can spread our positivity to others, including our contemporaries as well as our posterities. However, we as individuals do not have to take such a large step as reforming an entire education system to start discrimination. We can do things as we see them.
One of the most direct ways to prevent discrimination is by dealing with it firsthand. If we see any form of discrimination, whether it comes from a bully at school or an employer at a workplace, we should confront it and put an end to it right away, right then and there. Speaking to authorities can be the simplest way to prevent discrimination in everyday lives.
It is with this mentality that we should live our everyday lives if we are to further the mission of ending discrimination. And so we must go out and spread not only the good news, but also good faith and good ideas so as to create a more tolerant world for the generations of tomorrow.
So, now we've looked at works from historical philosophers such as Aristotle and Aquinas, as well as works from modern philosophers such as Murray and Doles. We can better understand how ethic applies to ending discrimination today, whether it be in the workplace, school, or society. And so, when we return to the mathematical principles we cited earlier, we can look at them with a more open mind.
When looking at the transitive property of equality, as we did earlier, we can see how things apply. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C also. Similarly, if I equal a person and you equal a person, then we are also equal to each other. Differences do not necessitate inequality.
But yes, we can apply math to our lives, in our ethics, in our mentalities, but most of all, in our worldview. So through combating discrimination, we will no longer feel subtractions of hope, but rather additions of love and understanding. Christian Martin Luther King Jr. once said, something must happen so as to touch the hearts and souls of people that they come together, not because the law says it, but because it is natural and right.
We must not view the world in such a way so that everyone has their own separate but absolute value. Rather, we have to view each person as absolutely valuable. It is through this mentality that we can expand tolerance exponentially. The square roots of our problems lie in not doing so. Regarding both ethics and math, the most challenging problems are the most rewarding to solve. We can create a nation where our differences don't disrupt our problem solving in a world ready to work together towards a common denominator. Our differences shouldn't divide us. Diversity should add to our lives and souls. Finding the limit of our worldview hinders us. We must derive from others what is integral to our lives, views of ethical toleration.